All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Illusion of Consensus podcast. This is Rav Aurora, independent journalist and podcaster based in Vancouver. I'm here with Aubrey Marcus, who I would describe as a visionary podcaster, thinker, philosopher, poet. I've been a fan of Aubrey's for a long time. And I was thinking in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination very deeply about not just the political ramifications, but the cultural, moral, and spiritual ramifications of what had just happened, and was struggling to make sense of it all and think beyond just the political, the left versus right. And we're going to talk about some of that here for sure. But I thought of Aubrey a few hours after I was thinking about it because Aubrey is very good at unifying polarities and finding common ground and just honing in on transcendent values and what unifies us. And so I thought instead of just doing another podcast that's more just about the surface level politics of this, and I may actually do one with someone who's kind of more on the far left side who views Charlie Kirk as being a propagator of hate speech. I might invite this person on my podcast and we'll have a fun, more political debate because I think that is interesting and can be insightful at times. But I wanted to do something more deeper and not to sound too grandiose, but kind of transcendent and just go beyond just the surface level analysis. And so I thought Aubrey is the perfect candidate for that. And I reached out to him after I was thinking about him in the wake of the shooting. And so I'm glad to do this. Thanks for being here, Aubrey. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just for the record, from time to time, I have to do this. I did this with Dave Smith recently, and we've done it with Brett Weinstein. Just got to say it here, just as a young person, I'm 24. Over the years, I've greatly admired and respected your work, particularly your podcast with Rogan back in the day. I think I was in high school when I first started listening to your podcasts, and a lot of podcasts you've done. I think Dr. Dan Engel. Engel, yeah, he wrote this great book on MDMA therapy. You've had some really good conversations with him about plant medicine and psychedelics, different kinds of psychedelics, and what their uses are. And so I've found you to be a very insightful, not just political thinker, but more so in the space of mental health, healing, and psychedelics over the years. As went from high school to graduating and then trying some of these things myself. People know that about me, having done psychedelic therapy and just trying to be a better man and work through my traumas and wounds and just operate with more agency and free will. Very interested in those subjects recently. And so you've been a very, very insightful thinker on those topics. So I've been a fan for a long time. So I appreciate the ability to have a conversation.
Yeah, as you're talking, we all have to do the work on ourselves, and we recognize that. And I think that's realized by most people. But why? Are we doing the work on ourselves just for ourselves? Well, not just for ourselves. Yes, we do the work on ourselves for ourselves, but we do it for those we love. And then we do it for an even wider and longer love list of people we love in general, the world that we love. We become a better person so that we can, yes, be better ourselves, but be better to those we impact and contact and be better for the world at large. And I think keeping that as the lodestar, as the kind of vision and mission of our life is that I will become better so that the world will become better. And this is all part of the same process. I think that's really important. And I think, as we kind of segue into what happened with Charlie Kirk, I think we have to recognize that all too often people are looking at short-term goals and, very personalized ideas without looking at the long-term ramifications and without looking at the impact, like holistically on the whole system that some of the rhetoric and some of the actions that they're taking might have.
That's really interesting. Yeah, most people, when they get into the inner healing world, therapy, meditation, breathwork, psychedelics, all of it, it's often they want some kind of relief or liberation from their suffering. And that very much feels like a strong North Star for a lot of people. But it's interesting you mentioning the broader societal benefit of inner healing as well.
I don't think it's enough to just want to, do it for yourself. I don't think that ever
Mm.
is a sufficient motivation. Now, it's part of the motivational architecture, but it's not and it can't exhaust the motivational architecture, because ultimately, if you look at, all right, I'm suffering, well, I could take some pills here that will numb the pain, or I could do a lot of this hard work and get through the pain. Both will solve the problem, in different ways. But what's actually, if you don't have a mission and a vision for who you are and what you want to be and what you're standing for, you're far more susceptible to take, the easy route, to push the easy button and to slip into patterns of addiction and distraction and avoidance. Whereas if you really have a clear vision, a clear idea of what you're here to do and the impact that you're here to make, that's really what drives you forward on this journey of self-transformation.
Mm. Yeah, that's really well said, and I think we're gonna have to face more and more of those dilemmas moving forward as technology advances, as AI advances, as pharmaceuticals advance. Right, in the future, if we get different kinds of potentially AI integrated or even not psychotechnologies that allow us to just be happy and joyful or forget some traumatic memory, and be able to escape suffering and social responsibility, is that something taking if it makes you feel really good but doesn't necessarily help society? I think that's going to be a very difficult challenge to face in the future for humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
um so let's get into it, the main topic, and I want to spring out from there into some deeper things. But the Charlie Kirk assassination, I'll just quickly share my thoughts, get your thoughts, and then go into some topics related to it. Um, yeah, when I saw that video, honestly, for a while, and just being honest, I still feel like I haven't fully processed it. And some of that I feel is the nature of social media and how it desensitizes us to suffering and pain. When I saw it, it just almost didn't feel real. There was a small part of me that thought, is this AI generated? But then everyone's posting it. Okay, it's real. This actually happened. So this isn't a deep fake. Um, but still, just seeing it on social media, there was something about it that felt kind of surreal and almost lacking in reality. Um, and then over time, just thinking about it the last few days, um, it just doesn't feel like something that would happen in 2025. One would think that at this point in our evolution as a species, we would have evolved out of this kind of tribalism and barbaric political violence, especially in the United States, in the free Western world, where we don't do stuff like that. The way North Korea or Iran or Russia, countries like that we associate with political violence. And I also just thought the other day, I just had forgot about this, but Charlie tragically died from the shooting, but there were also assassination attempts on the current sitting president, Trump. I just totally forgot about it for a while. And I was like, oh my God, this is not just a one thing. Trump survived 2 assassination attempts, and now Charlie didn't survive this one. But it's not just a one-time thing. There's a lot of anger and a lot of political extremism, and so I want to dive into some of those topics and how we're getting to this point. But it's really unfortunate that we're here where we have to talk about this. It just doesn't feel like a 2025 theme. This feels more of something I feel like we should have evolved from as a species. And I'm still thinking about the ramifications of that, but and we'll talk about a lot of things that have led to this culturally, politically, and socially. But there's just a lot of boiling hatred that just again feels very archaic, Stone Age, and primal, in a way that I hope we could transcend it as a species at some point, given that we haven't quite yet.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think we've been lulled into a false sense of security and safety because for most of us, most of the time, everything just goes on as normal and we feel totally safe. We go to the store, we go to the movies, we go to the concert, we go, and then just like, a nightmare that erupts out of the sky like a lightning bolt, something tragic and shocking can disrupt this, kind of idyllic pastoral scene of people getting along and having discourse, and then something really intense happens. And I think we're one of the few generations that have had the luxury of having so much safety that this is a shock. And I think, first of all, be grateful that we've gotten to a point where this is a shock, and also recognize that this is actually just something that's been happening from, since time immemorial. I mean, since uh, the earliest recorded history, these assassinations of political leaders and assassinations of people, this has been an aspect, as well as the wars, which, we still have many wars that are going on. There's just kind of two worlds. There's the world that includes all of the violence and horror that we know is real. And then there's the world that we live in, and those worlds don't often intersect. And especially if we haven't served in the military, we haven't actually experienced the kind of gritty, dark, violent side of humanity. And so when something like this happens, it's like, oh shit, there's a whole nother aspect to this experience of life that we're not fully prepared for. And it is quite a shock and a surprise. And unfortunately, I think, one of the lessons of this is that we may be entering into a time of increased turbulence and chaos, and we have to bring in a different level of situational awareness and reality that, this the kind of safety and security and comfort that we've once felt is a noble aspirational thing that we're all striving towards, but we may have to go through some turbulence in order to get back there or to maintain that which already exists.
Immediate reaction and thoughts to that particular horrifying event?
Well, the obviously, the first aspect is that it revealed that there were certain factions of our society that were so desensitized to the human being that was Charlie Kirk, regardless of whether you agreed with his ideas, you agreed with his premises, you agreed with his politics. He was a husband, he was a father. He kissed his wife goodnight, he kissed his kids goodnight, and hugged his kids goodnight, and read them bedtime stories, and then woke up and then went out to do what he thought was best. He had a mission and he had a clear picture of faith, and he was doing what he thought was best for the world. And whether you agree with his idea of what was best, that's not the point. The point is that this was a real human being, and all human beings are our brothers and our sisters. We are our brother's keeper. And I think that's something that at the very simplest level is an inarguable, you know, failure of our collective consciousness to recognize the humanity in everybody, and to say that, like, even if they have different ideas than us, this is a human being. Like, this is somebody that is they may have different ideas, but they're still made of the same flesh and blood. They're still nursed off the same life-giving water of, our mother earth. and still filled with the spiritual fire of the Father, whatever your beliefs are about, your theology. We have to recognize our shared commonality. And, we saw a lot of fracturing in people's responses, and also some encouraging signs. I think, one of my friends reposted a tweet from Joe Biden, and presumably that was Joe Biden's team that tweeted it. I don't think he's on X, that running X posts, but sending just no buts, no ands, just sending prayers, and sending prayers to Charlie and his family. And it's like that's actually an encouraging sign, is to actually see the leadership, which has been so reprehensible in fomenting this kind of vitriol and dehumanization of the other side. Actually, we need to recognize, like, we can have a good contest, a good fight, but this is beyond the bounds of it. This is far beyond, what is acceptable. And, I'm a big MMA fan and combat sports fan in general. And one of the most beautiful parts about that sport is that even after the most intense fight, typically the more intense the fight, the more, heartfelt the embrace is after the contest. Right. But like, if you imagine you're in a UFC ring and they've been talking shit and they're squaring off, and before they go actually to have their MMA match, somebody grabs a gun from their cornerman's, fanny pack and shoots their opponent in the chest. Like, we're not playing the game. We're not actually abiding by the rules of how this thing is set up. And it just degrades the whole fundamental structure of the sport. And in the same way, an assassination like this degrades the fundamental structure of the debate of ideas to decide which ideas win in our policies and in our choices and in the way that we govern our people. And so there's no excuse for anyone celebrating or cheering that this tragic event happened. This is an absolute violation of the fundamental ethos of what actually makes America special, what makes human beings special, is that we agree to a set of rules of engagement. And this was violently violated, and that's such a tragedy and such a shock.
Yeah. I think one of the underlying social pathologies at the heart of what happened that day with this one individual, but it's not just this one individual who did this. This is a representation of where we're at in our ethos, as you said, is this problem of distilling a person's essence to their political orientation, as in politics is destiny, politics is who you really are. And I see a lot of people falling into that trap and that illusion. Now, obviously, Charlie Kirk, he was known professionally, famous for being a political operator, communicator, influencer, podcaster. He's not making videos about cooking or about music or wrestling or whatever it is. He operated in the political sphere, but there's a way in which I feel like we have abandoned any sense of core morality or ethics, such that someone like that can just be seen as a political operator who has these views on abortion, gay marriage, immigration, Trump versus Biden, all these things. And it feels like people have misunderstood what like our core humanity is, and instead took, you and I are both interested in Eastern traditions, and there's the idea of the false self, the ego, the illusion of our liminal egocentric identity. But just like not even that, just like taking a part of our egotistical identity, which is our politics, and just latching onto that as just this person is defined by his or her political views on gun control, immigration, COVID, and whatever it is. Have you sensed that as well?
Soren Kierkegaard had a quote that says, "When you name me, you negate me." And what he's, one interpretation of what he's talking about here is that it's this process of labeling. And when you label somebody as something, you remove them from, you don't call them by their name, the name that God calls them by on their birthday, like, like I couldn't do it without you. Charlie Kirk, says God to Charlie Kirk as the infinite intimate, speaking his name. It's like, no, he's a right-wing fascist, Nazi, racist, etc. So you start labeling all of these names, and these names then have associations with them. And we've seen this in every major war, that in record is there's a dehumanization of the other side. And it happens not only in wars, but in slavery and genocides. There's a dehumanization as a justification for the treatment of a person or a class of people. So you start calling somebody rats or cockroaches or sheep or whatever else it might be. This process of labeling, negating is actually one of the dominoes that creates the inertia that then allows the justification for the killing of this human being. You've labeled them as such. And, in some ways, while I eat meat and I try to eat meat that's sourced in in an ethical way, I like free range. And, we all recognize that there's something that's kind of weird if you eat an animal that you've named. Like if you eat, Dolly the sheep. This is Dolly. Dolly's been with our family. Oh, now we're eating Dolly. It's like, oh, that's fucked up. But if we're just eating mutton, we're just eating mutton. We're just eating meat. So in a way, like you can even see this in a different ideology with animals. Like there's, once somebody has a personhood and we actually as a self and we identify them as a self, we understand innately there's something fucked up about eating them, extracting from them, consuming them, just killing them. There's something that's wrong with that. And so this is the process that's happening with human beings. Human beings are they're not being called by their name, the name that is their sacred God-given name. Of course their parents gave it to them, but they have a name, a unique letter in the infinite alphabet of the Akash. Like this is one unique iteration of the divine manifestations. Like that has a name. And when you efface a person by removing their name and then ascribing a label to them, then it opens the door for all kinds of mistreatment and violence.
Right. And to my earlier point, just to elaborate on that more, like a lot of people who disagreed with Charlie Kirk's ideas, and particularly those that vehemently disagreed with his politics, there just appears to be this misperception of him, Charlie Kirk, just being this representation for right-wing, racist, misogynistic, whatever ist you want to add, bigotry. And there's just a lack of what I was saying earlier, an understanding of shared humanity, shared moral principles, and a spiritual interconnectedness. A lot of Eastern philosophies, like aspects of Hinduism, highlight how we are actually one. We're part of this one gigantic, ineffable, infinite universe. We're actually not separate. We're deeply interconnected. But a lot of young people I've seen post about this, and older people with professional careers and jobs post about Charlie Kirk in a very negative, reactive, primal, dehumanizing way. Don't seem to see this shared human connection. It seemed there's this vast gulf of separation between them and Charlie, and it's just Charlie's just this evil, right-wing, hateful character. But in reality, they're not seeing that, as you said earlier, Charlie, husband, father, man who operated beyond just politics and even religious views. And I want to talk more about that later, about religion. But there's just a way in which, in social media and online discourse seems to accentuate this, where people, it's just, there's a flattening or just a dehumanization of the person of Charlie Kirk being a political representative, rather than maybe if there was a way for a lot of these people calling him out, if they had seen him in person or shook hands with him, had dinner with him, had a conversation with him, maybe disagreed vehemently still, and that's fine. But that might have having a more human connection with someone and understanding them beyond just their political identity, I think would potentially help us transcend this very primal division that we're seeing. And it's just I'm not sure what the way out of this is, but I just see a lot of people removing any sense of humanity from Charlie Kirk and just seeing him as just the sum total of these political views that they find odious.
Yeah, I mean, that what you're talking about definitely exists, but in reality, what I've seen more is this be a catalyst for an awakening to those
Yeah.
deeper principles, to people waking up to this idea like, whoa, like maybe we've gone too far, and I've seen some really encouraging things like, I saw a post from pretty outspoken, more on the liberal side, Cancel Ian Carroll. And he made a post, about Charlie Kirk. And he was like, he had ridiculed and made fun of Charlie in many of his things. But he was like, yo, like this was a person. And he's like, I meet people all the time who are on the vast other side of what I believe. And almost, without exception, I finished that encounter and I like them. I may not agree with them, but I like them. They're people. And so he had a really poignant and powerful post. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are actually, this is awakening their humanity. So while this is highlighting some of the negative, I think it's important to also focus our attention on the positive that's come of this kind of awakening that's happening, where people are realizing, okay, like we can't operate at the same level that we've been operating. Einstein's famous quote, you can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created it. And we all have to be careful that even those people who are celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, yes, it's reprehensible, but guess what? They're people too. They're also people. And yes, that is an inexcusable point of view. And the point should be to try and help them, to try to open their minds and hearts. Like they're impaired. They're not like evil, they're impaired. They're just not seeing things correctly. And so what do you do with someone who's impaired? It's like if someone is can't cross the street because their legs aren't functioning, you're not like, well, fucking let's kill this person, can't cross the street. No, you help them
Yeah.
cross the street. Like help them to actually get beyond their blindness and their blind spots, and help them actually open their minds and hearts. And that's the way forward. The way forward is not to create another, oh, see, the liberals are all evil and the liberals don't care,
Right.
and the liberals are blah blah blah. And then we're doing the same thing that led to Charlie Kirk's death, but just in the inverse. We're dehumanizing another group of people, and then there'll be violence towards that other group of people after we've sufficiently dehumanized them. The whole thing has to elevate. And
Yeah.
I think we're stuck in an old game, and the old game is this tit for tat, win-lose metrics, rivalrous conflict, you hurt me, I hurt you. You say something to me, I say something back to you. No, that doesn't ever solve the problem. It creates this endless, this endless rivalrous conflict. The famous Hatfields and McCoys that had a family rivalry that spanned like 4 generations. That's not going to lead to anything but more death and more suffering. Yes, in the short term, may galvanize a group's social identity because it'll, anger and all of this rage and everything, all of these heavy emotions will bond people together. But that short term benefit for whatever in group you're creating is ultimately tearing this country apart and tearing this world apart. So we have to actually break free of the cycle. We have to break the wheel and start a new game that starts with rehumanizing every single individual. And it's not just Eastern philosophies that have been talking about this, like our very own First Nations people, the Lakota Sioux, before every ceremony, what do they say? Aho metakuye oyasin, we are all related. They say that several times a day. And it's a reminder of our interconnectedness, not only with each other, but with everything, with the whole earth and all of the animal kingdom, plant kingdom, mineral kingdom, human kingdom, star kingdom, all of it. We're all a part of this same blessing that is life.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, I also saw some very kind, heartfelt messages from a couple people in particular. I saw Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks. They're popular left-wing news outlet, and they strongly condemned what had happened and were emphasizing this aspect of shared humanity and common understanding. On the other hand, I did see, I think Anna was debating this guy Destiny on Piers Morgan's show, and he was refusing, oddly enough, to condemn this and blaming it on Trump and saying it's the right's fault and like falling into this divisive tribalism. And Anna was rightly calling him out on it. But I did see, to your point, a lot of people, popular influencers and thinkers on the left who were condemning this as well. I also saw Ezra Klein from the New York Times, progressive thinker and writer, hosting Ben Shapiro on his podcast at the New York Times and talking about how we can de-escalate our politics. So there are these promising signs, and I like what you're saying, and this is something I wanted to talk about too, was to not only emphasize the extent of the pathology of what's going on, but also this opportunity for awakening. And I really see it as a positive opportunity, as tragic as what happened was, but to reach out to people of different political persuasions and have more open conversations about difficult topics. Sometimes it takes the storm, the tragedy, um, the challenge, the difficulty, the death to find new light and find new awakening. It's a pattern as old as time. And so I would like to see more of those conversations now. And there's a way in which that's totally possible. After something tragic like that. Like I saw actually 2 people on the right, but of very different philosophies, Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro. I think Ben said he called Tucker, I'm pretty sure not the other way around, and said they had a conversation about unifying. And while they have their strong disagreements on foreign policy, on Israel, they're going to come together and do some kind of event or discussion and just unify beyond these political disagreements about what's happening in Ukraine or immigration or what happened during COVID and vaccines and all these polarizing topics. I am seeing on the right people like Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's company, talk about how like the right needs to unite and conservatives need to unite, and talking about quashing any beefs he's had with any other people on the right, and just unifying against the left. I get what he's doing there, and I get the motivation, but I do wonder if there's something even deeper, and maybe this is naive, and maybe, or you could say maybe what he's doing is a little more cynical, of just unifying the right and all its diversity of opinions, on issues like foreign policy, the more interventionist types versus the more isolationist types, bringing those people together versus the aspects of the left that support putting kids with gender dysphoria on puberty blockers, or letting big pharma control our politics, and pushing all these vaccines that haven't been properly tested on young children. Like, I understand that perspective, but I'm curious how you think about this. Of instead of that framework that some conservatives are pushing, if we can just push more, not left versus right, but shared common principles and humanity.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it even makes sense to frame it that way, of like,
Oh, for
it's
sure,
it's
for
it's
sure.
it's
I
it's,
mean,
it's humanity versus those, whether left or right or far left, who some people, and I don't know what I want to get into some of these things too. This might seem more esoteric for some people, but is it possible to say that some people are deeply pathological or in the grips of some evil, or pushing something like gender affirming care and like very extreme ideas, and seemingly pushing things that are deeply wrong and unethical? Is it possible to have a framework of, we come together and oppose those people, or even invite those people in and try to have a conversation with them? Now, I understand why some people will think that's naive, because a lot of those people, like, I'm willing to try, and I'm talking to someone from high school who's very much on the far left side, who felt like Charlie Kirk was a representation of deep hatred and bigotry, and I'm trying to reach out to this person and have a conversation. But I wonder if there are just some people we just won't reach, and they're under the grips of some very dark, sinister ideology.
yeah. So there's a couple points to kind of touch on here. So I'll kind of patiently go through a couple of them and share my
Yep.
thoughts. The first is, it's a very old and common idea that you can unite groups with petty differences with a common enemy. So if you have a common enemy, you can unite. So think of the story of William Wallace. Well, what was the first part of the story of Braveheart and William Wallace? Unite the clans. All these clans were warring against each other. It was the McCullochs and the Wallaces and all of these, and they're all battling against each other. The first step is unite the clans, because Britain had overstepped, and Edward Longshanks had overstepped his authority and his policy. So they were going to unite as a unified Scotland and stand up for their values and their rights. So this idea of uniting one group against another group, that's an old idea. I mean, before Genghis Khan went on his kind of tirade across Eurasia, he first had to unite the Mongol clans. So this is not a new idea. This is just about solidarity within the in-group. And that solidarity is, it's almost a pseudo solidarity if the solidarity comes from, okay, we're just uniting because there's an enemy. There's a common enemy there. And, sometimes that's necessary. Like the Allies in, World War II united against the common enemy of Hitler and the Nazis and the Axis powers, right? Like, so there is sometimes a common enemy that brings people together, that unites them. And that's just it's a natural thing that occurs. This is nothing new. This is not solving a problem at a new level of consciousness. This is an old thing. Like, you feel attacked, you set aside your petty differences and you unify yourself so that you're a stronger fighting force. So yes, that's helpful. But when you're talking about unification in general, I think what the real unification is getting back to a set of shared values and shared principles that we all have, and unifying first on those shared values and principles, and then having all of the things that you disagree on, all your interpretations of how those principles apply. Like and this is also even in talking about abortion. Like, are you pro-life or pro-choice? Well, that's a fucked up dilemma to be in, because life and choice are both values, right? So there's the value of life and there's the value of choice. So it's a nuanced and it's a difficult conversation. But you can't just say, like, pro-life, pro-choice. Well, you should be pro-life and choice. Like, of course, they're both values, but you have to weigh and measure them in the field of value. So we need to put all of the values on the table, right? And this is something that, I've been studying with Rebbe Gafni, and he put out a book called First Principles and First Values, trying to create and expand upon what Aldous Huxley's project was a perennial philosophy.
The perennial, yeah.
Yeah, perennial philosophy, and this evolving perennialism of what are our shared ideas and beliefs and moralities and our shared commonalities. And that needs to extend beyond the in groups, and that needs to extend to everybody. What are the shared human first principles and first values that we all agree on? And then from there, where are the interpretations of what we should do based on these shared first principles and first values? Now, there is actually anti-value and anti-life, an intentional, or sometimes unintentional, absolute opposition to value itself. It's just to like, I just want to see the world burn. I mean, I think that was something that, was said to Batman, in one of the films. I can't remember exactly which, but, said some people just want to watch the world burn. And, and Batman couldn't understand that. He couldn't understand, like, what Bruce Wayne couldn't understand, like, wait, some people just want to watch the world burn. Like, what do you mean? But that's real. Evil is real. Anti-value is real. It exists. And so, but the thing is that no person is pure evil or pure anti-value. That's reserved for, and I've pointed often in recent dialogues to Ephesians 6:12, which says basically our fight is not with flesh and blood, our brothers and sisters, but with those dark powers, those authorities, those evil forces in the heavenly realms. This is pure evil is reserved for outside of the incarnation of life, and it exists. And now people can participate in that, but really they're participating in it usually unwittingly, usually blindly. Intentional malice, where someone is like, I'm evil and I'm doing evil, that's rare. It's very rare. And in those cases where someone is committed to evil and committed to an anti-value, anti-life path, then the warriors, the protectors, have to step in and say, like, okay, like this cannot stand, and it is the greatest tragedy, but we have to use whatever force necessary to actually, stand for the common values that we all carry.
Right.
But
so you're not an advocate for any kind of naive pacifism. You have a very sophisticated understanding of force being necessary in those cases.
Yeah, and I think the first step is like it has to be the minimum effective amount of force necessary. So what is the minimum effective amount of force to neutralize the threat? Because I firmly believe that no one, if they're alive, no one is beyond the possibility of redemption and transformation. Everybody has the possibility of redemption and transformation, and we should fight for that liberation, because every soul is our brother and sister. Every soul is a child of God. That's why in Ephesians it says our fight is not with flesh and blood. So we have to liberate the flesh and blood. We have to liberate the minds from this psychic blindness, what Paul Levy calls wetiko, which is an ancient Native American term for this psychic blindness, these dark forces. I'm writing a book currently called You versus Anti-You that really goes deep into these dark forces, this inner and exterior antagonist that exists in our world. It's just part of the construct. It's like our constant opponent. So there is a fight between good and evil, but we have to agree on what is good. We have to fundamentally agree on what that is. And now there's going to be different interpretations about what to do. That's where it gets tricky. What do you do?
Yeah.
Like
what should the tax rate be?
What does Israel do after the attack? On October 7th, like, what do they do? And how do they do it? There's tons of different opinions about that. But, and that's actually, and I don't want to go super deep into that subject, but that's the thing that I think was missing. This is a question of, obviously values were violated on that day. There's horrible things that were done. But what is the response? What is the appropriate response when something like this is done? This is not the old retaliatory, vengeful Yahweh, you did this, I'm going to fucking flood the earth, I'm going to burn you to the ground, that's an old conception of value. We need a new conception of value that's more Christic, that leaves the possibility for redemption, on the table. And we need to fight for that. And I think
Yeah.
that's the new consciousness that needs to come in. And I really see a very strong, Christian unification happening. While I'm not a Christian, I appreciate
Yeah.
that there, oftentimes, not like the old days when it was, burn the witches, torture the heretics, excommunicate, all the things that we know that the Catholic Church did for, the last millennia. There's a lot of really Christic thinking that's coming out of the Christian faith at this point. And I really appreciate that, because I think that is the next level of consciousness. It's recognizing actually our shared humanity, from this Christ consciousness perspective. So, and I think that needs to also transcend some of the dogma of the fundamentalism that goes as
Yeah.
kind of like baggage with Christianity. But nonetheless, I'm seeing the most encouraging morality coming from Christianity at this moment, out of anywhere that I'm looking in the world.
Mm. I want to unpack that more, the religious, the spiritual, and the shared values. But just to back up for a second, want to get your thoughts on, want to drill more into that, what people like Matt Walsh and other conservatives are saying about unifying people on the right, against the radical leftists. Like, do you see any utility in a framework like that, or would you propose a different kind of framework?
I think as soon as you call it radical leftists, I think you're missing I think you're also in this labeling game. Like, all of the right and all of humanity needs to unify against
Yeah.
anti-value and anti-life, and
Right.
really understand what that is, and then be humble enough to say that my interpretations of what anti-value and anti-life is, that is something that is subject for debate. And I think that's something that Charlie stood for, is like, I'm willing to debate these ideas. I'm willing to share openly what I believe the good, the true, the beautiful is, what I believe value means. And I want to hear what you believe value means. And that was an important thing that he stood for, and in many ways was martyred for. He was martyred because he was somebody who was willing to have conversations. It wasn't because he was right. He was correct about everything that he was saying. I think he made a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And also, sometimes he was smug. Sometimes he seemed more arrogant than he needed to be. Sometimes he was more fundamentalist than I agreed with. Sometimes, his premises, but ultimately he was willing to actually engage with people, hear their disagreements, and then contest with logic. I saw a clip where somebody, they were in this kind of debate format, and he was like, I challenge you to a fist fight, fight me right here in the grass. And Charlie's like, no, I'm not going to do that, because we're beyond that. Like, this is not the game we're playing. Like, this is what happens if you run out of ways that you can contest with ideas, then of course you turn to violence. And, I think Charlie was really a stand for, come up with your best ideas, come up with your best arguments, come up with your best challenges. Let's talk about them. And then let's shake hands at the end of this. And I think everybody that I've seen who has this kind of debate attitude, it's like a great MMA fighter or a champion. They always embrace at the end of the fight, no matter how intense the fight was. It was like, good fight. And there's even more
Yeah.
respect for someone who comes with a good fight, that abides by the rules. And I think that's the world that we need to live in. We need to have these open forums and dialogues. And anytime we start classifying people as right, left, this, that, I just wish they would do away with the parties entirely. Like, the parties it's a heuristic. and it's a way that people can associate a bunch of things. Oh, Republican, red, right, this means this. It's everybody has a unique take on what that means. Even Christians, every Christian is different.
Yeah.
You know, like it's like
Yeah.
there's no, everybody's abiding by, so all of these group labels are different. You know, everybody's unique and different. So I think it's really about getting back to values, and I think really unifying people who stand for value and stand for life, like in the propagation of life, which includes death, you know, and includes all of the other values, but stands for the field of value, and stands for the evolution of our world, and stands for God, you know. And that's a complicated word, but if God
Mm.
is value, people who stand for value stand for God, stand for value. But let's just use value because it's a less loaded word. People who stand for value are going to need to unite against those who stand against value, those who are
Mm.
standing against the degradation of value itself.
Mm. That's really interesting, and that's now I know exactly why I thought of you for this conversation, because I've been trying to think of a more transcendent framework than, again, I saw people like Matt Walsh tweeting this, people on the right need to unite against the radical left, and I get where that's coming from, and I understand that very clearly, but I feel like there's something even deeper that we can tap into, and that is a more interesting, more profound framework, I think, um, because just immediately what I felt when I saw Matt tweet that was that there are lots of rational, reasonable people on center left, libertarian, center right, that need to unify, that oppose radical things like gender affirming care and um, uh, uh, pushing for vaccines that haven't been properly tested, or having unfettered open immigration without any kind of discipline or structure. There are tons of people that need to unify among those values, and it's not just plainly people on the right. Um, and
Yeah,
but
I mean,
yeah,
that's absolutely right, because I don't consider myself part of the right. Okay. So I don't consider myself part of the right. I
yeah,
don't consider
me
myself part
neither,
of the
really.
left.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so then do you want me on your team or not? Am I not on your team? Like, am I left out of this conversation because I won't, pledge my allegiance to team red? Or like, we need a broader team. But if you're standing for value, and if you're standing for love and truth and beauty and goodness, and yeah, I'm on your fucking team. And that's the team that needs to unite, the team that stands for value.
right, right. And those people, if we want to just drill into that for a second, I don't want to fixate on it, but to just drill on it a little bit more, those people anti-value, um, they're the people that feel like what Charlie was doing was perpetuating hate speech and bigotry and racism and misogyny, and that there were very realistic, predictable consequences for what he did. I mean, that's time and time again what I'm hearing from people who have a very different view about him. And I've seen these discussions online, and various YouTubers and political thinkers on the left who are saying that. Again, there are people who are not saying that. I mentioned some of those: Ezra Klein, Anna Kasparian, Cenk Uygur, lots of other ones too, which I was happy to see. But there are those that just seem to have a very warped sense of morality. And do you feel like even in your framework, like, do you think there's and I would probably lean on this side without having thought about it too much, but do you think there is that utility of having that binary or that framework of people who stand for value versus those that stand for anti-values, people who rather resort to violence, or not necessarily people who even do that, but would justify or celebrate or view it as an understandable reaction or consequence to what Charlie was doing? There was a lot of that happening. do you feel like that binary is still important, and do you feel like with that binary we can
Well,
still reach out to those people?
it's not a binary. It's a spectrum, right? Nobody who's alive is pure evil, right? Like, I just fundamentally don't believe that. I mean, you'd have to be completely and utterly 100% possessed by those darker forces in the heavenly realms, as talked about in Ephesians 6:12. You'd have to be completely possessed. I don't believe in complete possession. And I think in our modern mythos of Star Wars, for example, like Darth Vader was about as dark as you could get, right? Just, Death Star, destroyer of worlds, this, and so this, and Kylo Ren, same thing. They were Siths. They were on the dark side. They were harnessing the dark side of the Force. They were connected to the darkest energy possible. But the Jedi, and they always held out hope and faith that there was still some goodness in them left. And we see this in all of our hero movies. All of these hero movies, which are scripts of culture of what, like, truth. They're true stories, not true because they actually happened, that there really was a Darth Vader. Of course there wasn't. But they're true stories in that they're pointing to this reality that there's always a shred of goodness still within somebody.
Yeah.
They still at some point nursed at their mother's breast and felt the goodness of life and God and the mother, and there's still the possibility for that redemption. And I think so it's not so much a binary, but there is something to stand for, and to standing for value. So it's a spectrum, and also you can loosely aggregate those that stand for value versus those who stand for anti-value. And the purpose in this contest is not to kill all the people who stand for anti-value. That's the last resort. That's the very last option on the table. Every other effort should be to try to convert, reach out to them, find their humanity. And, that needs to be the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth option. And then finally, the 10th option is like, fuck, you're going to keep hurting, killing people if we don't actually remove you from the board and neutralize you. And that's, I think, the place that we need to get to, where we've exhausted every attempt at transformation and redemption. And then finally, we can actually look at what the strategies are for, violence.
Right. And we can still reach out to those people and try to have a conversation, even if we radically disagree. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And with Charlie, part of having a mature, sophisticated, morally elevated conversation is to acknowledge his humanity and for the good things that he stood for, but we don't have to be wishy-washy or superficial or sort of just bypassing certain things that we might not agree with. So like I'm not a Christian fundamentalist, or I have some positions that I'd lean more conservative on, some more I'd lean liberal on. Charlie was an opponent of gay marriage, for example. I support that. I would say very, very, very cautiously pro-choice, but I've gone back and forth on that issue quite a bit. But I would say cautiously pro-choice. He's pro-life, and some people online have pointed to me how he's advocated for a young girl being raped at 16, 17, and for her to still have that child and raise it. And other people on the pro-choice side feel very strongly about that woman should, that girl should be able to choose. And I understand all of that, and I think you don't have to. You don't have to say he's right about everything. You can say that I disagreed with these positions and I stood for this, I stood for that, but we can still acknowledge the shared humanity.
The problem is that people are not thinking carefully and clearly, right? Like, why did Charlie have that strict there should be no abortion stance. Why? Like, what was his reason? Is it because he was an evil person and just wanted suffering to befall, young women who've been raped, and he was actually, this was his exaltation of the wickedness and the desire to cause pain? And no, it wasn't that. It was that he had a fundamental belief that no matter how the child, and I'm not saying that I agree with Charlie's stance here, but I can think through why he had that position, because he shares it. The reason he had that position is that at the moment of conception, God has decided to place a soul on the trajectory of life. And no matter how it came about, this was all part of God's design. And at that point, it's out of our hands. We don't get the choice to actually say, nope, God, you're wrong. And that's his belief. Now, I don't share that belief. I believe that we're agents that work with God, that we're God's partners. And so I don't agree with Charlie's belief, but I understand where he's coming from. And I can say, like, Charlie, man, I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I'm coming from this different place. And I would be quite confident that if Charlie and I had a long conversation and I explained where I came from and our relationship to God and what I believe, and then he explained what he believed, I said, Charlie, dude, I totally get why you believe what you believe. And you would get, Aubrey, man, I totally get why you believe what you believe. And, we believe we have different premises, and so these different premises lead to these different conclusions. But it's not because either one of us are evil. It's not because I want to murder, new souls before they're alive, or that Charlie wants to, torture young teens and make them live in a life of, having to see the face of their rapist every day of their life. Like, no, that's not why. It's just that there's different premises and different consequences to these choices. So it's a complicated issue, but we always try to, like, because someone believes in something, it means that they're truly evil, and they're evil because they believe that. No, understand why they believed what they believed. Like, understand why that, and try to change, try to use your argumentation to change that. But in reality, most people are coming from a good place. Even most people who are pushing the vaccine or the lockdown agendas, most of them were coming from a good place. They were like,
we want to protect grandma.
I want to protect grandma. I want to do
I don't
my
want people to die.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that intention is noble. Like, and we first have to acknowledge that. Like, look, your intention is noble, but what you're not seeing is that you're being lied to, one, and now the receipts are coming out about the lies that we're being told. And two, you're not aware of what's happening when you're placed under that much fear. You're not thinking clearly.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of fear. And in the shadow, you're not aware that there's a righteousness and a moral superiority that's feeding your ego, that you're actually trying to gain benefit from the feeding of your ego. And you're not aware of those things. But that's okay. Like, I'm here to help you become aware of what happens when you're placed in fear. And it's okay to be scared, but this is what happens to your brain when you're in fear. Okay, this is, we all have this egoic desire to be better than other people. I understand. But this is not a way that you need to actually claim your betterness than your neighbor. It's all bullshit anyways. We're all children of God. Like, you're not going to ever be better than anybody else. You can be better at chess, and if you wanted to figure that out, let's bust out a chessboard and see who's better. Let's actually compete and see. Like, there's games where you can be better at, but not the game of life. No person is better than another person, at the fundamental level. Now, they may do better things, objectively for the world, but ultimately, like, we're just not thinking clearly. And we've had a lot of politicians and legacy media and a lot of people who've been hijacking our worst thinking, our cognitive biases, our, shadow tendencies, and exacerbating the poor introspection and analysis that's really kind of led us to this place where just people aren't thinking clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, and even with the disagreement that you highlighted there, disagreeing with someone in good faith, like you can still have a very vehement or maybe even aggressive disagreement still. Like you use the abortion example, well articulated, but say with gay marriage, right? I support that, but I understand where someone like Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro, why they would oppose it from their religious framework and their belief of the sacredness of conserving from their conservative religious perspective the monogamous heterosexual relationship between a man and a woman, and why the importance of reproduction, raising kids, um uh I understand the importance of that perspective, and why a lot of people of that persuasion will believe that there's a slippery slope, and that if you allow gay marriage, then what else are you going to allow? Are you going to allow? Does that open the gates to pedophilia or to other morally questionable or highly
Again,
suspect things?
this is all that's sloppy fucking thinking. And again, so break, like, everybody needs to just go really, really slow. Okay, gay marriage. All right, so people who are on this kind of Christian fundamentalist
Yeah,
idea, they believe, okay, marriage is a divine covenant that is intended to be, in the presence and witnessed by God, a blessed union. It's a religious ceremony, and this religious ceremony should only be reserved for the people that God intended this religious ceremony to be for. All right, like, I can understand that. However, our society, there are rights and privileges from a tax perspective, from accessibility perspective, from all kinds of perspectives that are granted to people who are married, whether you believe in God or not. So what needs to happen is that we need to disambiguate the legal and societal, like, legislative benefits of marriage from the sacred Christian marriage. But now they're conflated. So it's the same thing. So if you get certain benefits for being married, of course we have to allow gay marriage, because people should have benefits. If couples who are committed and devoted to each other get benefits societally and
yeah,
from taxes, of course we have to allow it.
right.
But can there be another thing? Call it a sacred Christian covenant that only, people who abide by the sacred Christian covenant rules get to participate in that type of marriage.
Yeah, I've thought about that. Yeah,
Sure, if it's a
yeah,
religious issue, the religion can make whatever requirements they want, but it's not that.
yeah,
It's there, and there's this, we're supposed to have this separation of church and state, and I think this argument is pointing how they've been conflated,
yeah,
and that there's people claiming that marriage is a religious thing, and then people who are correctly pointing out, like, no, it's not just a religious thing, it's also a legislative and IRS related thing, so this isn't fair.
right.
So I think that it's just simple things like that need to be
Yeah,
clarified, and that's one of the things that I'm really bummed about, and just bummed is like a euphemism for how sad I am about Charlie Kirk's death, is because I did look forward to one day being able to have these conversations with him, because
right.
most of the time he was contesting against people who weren't thinking very clearly.
Yeah,
It wasn't like he had, like, it was, the great challenge. He had a great challenge. It's not because he wasn't, like, open to it, but just most of the people on college campuses, they're just not thinking very clearly.
yeah,
And so he was dominating these debates. Great. All right, what happens if he goes in there with someone who's really thought through these things and is thinking clearly and coming from different premises? Like, and I wish, like, I really wish that I would have had a chance to have these discussions with them and go through. But fortunately, there's other people who, share that same conviction, and I think it's really important that we have these debates and have these discussions and just clarify our thinking.
Yeah, 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 and again, you can acknowledge the shared humanity and engage in this process of collective cultural mourning and acknowledgement for our shared humanity, but it doesn't mean you have to celebrate all of his views or his opinions.
Of
Again,
course.
what I said earlier, that trap of politics is life, politics is destiny, and therefore, if we feel any shred of mourning or sadness or frustration or grief about Charlie Kirk, that means that we endorse all of his opinions. And I'm just messaging a lot of people who are angry at me for tweeting certain things that I'm like, no, I disagreed with him on X, Y, and Z. I use the gay marriage example. So I'm not going to pretend that that I agreed with him on that position. And I feel like we could have had a rational discussion on that. But again, there's something deeper than those particular opinions, and that's where I want to go next with you. You alluded to the perennial philosophy, Aldous Huxley, famous philosopher who wrote this great book on perennialism, the idea that there are transcendent, universal moral truths across religions and spiritual disciplines. And so, Aubrey, can we talk about what these shared principles might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think rather than enumerate all of them,
Mm-hmm.
I would posit a way to understand them and actually to feel them. And there's a reading that Rebbe Gafni shared that some of the Kabbalist masters have taken from a story from the Book of Genesis, and the story is about the binding of Isaac when Abraham goes up to actually sacrifice his son and sacrifice his son because he believes that's a command from God. And he goes with his knife in his hand and he's going to sacrifice his son. Then he hears the voice of the angel of mercy or God say, like, no, don't sacrifice your son. And there's a reading that that voice actually came from his arm. His arm actually told him, like, don't do this. Like he had his hand raised, like his mind was convinced. And if you know the backstory, so he was about to be sacrificed by his father, Nimrod. So this is a classic repetition compulsion story. So if you're abused, then you abuse somebody else. So there's a pattern that was in place. So he was almost sacrificed. So then he gets this idea in his head that he's supposed to sacrifice his son. He thinks it's the voice of God, and then he goes to do it. But it was actually his arm. His arm sent him a message like, don't fucking do this. And this points to a principle called anthro-ontology. And anthro is short for anthropos, which
Human.
is body, yeah, human. And
Yep.
ontology is how we know. And actually, I think we don't think about value, we feel value. We actually know value. We know when something is actually good and something is not good. Unless we've been so indoctrinated and enculturated in our mind and are so blind. And that's why Wetiko or anti-you is called a psychic blindness, is it blinds us to the actual innate knowing. But if we clear ourselves of our blind spots, we actually can know and sense value. We know what's right. We know what's good. And, I think, again, watching these movies of heroes, like we know when the hero makes the right move and we know when he makes the wrong move. And they'll explore with the fine lines and the difficult decisions and the ways that it goes. But we know that the hero acts in a way that the hero knows is good. And he knows it from an ineffable understanding. So I think value lives within us. It lives at the molecular level, like it lives at the somatic level, it lives at the etheric level, it lives at all levels. It lives in us, as us, through us and beyond us. And actually, if we really listen to our body, we know what's right. We know what's good. Like we know when we see the videos of, that attacker on the train who, killed the young Ukrainian woman, and we see that nobody responded and went to help her or responded to neutralize the attacker. We know in our body, like, that was wrong. Like that there was a value that was transgressed. Or like if there's something that happens and you see a guy and a girl out, and I don't mean to use guy girl stereotypes, but you see someone who's clearly embodying the masculine principle, and you see them jump behind their girlfriend, you're like, there's something wrong there. We know it, and then yes, men, women, they're each one could be a badass and whatever. All that's all good, but there's just something that feels off here. And so I think there's a gnosis that we have within ourselves. Like we know value. We actually know if we're willing to listen to that still small voice inside. And so we feel value and we know value anthropologically. And I think that's the best way to sort it out. Otherwise we're just listing virtues, but then there's always the exceptions to the virtues and moral philosophies and principles. But we'll just we have to trust that we'll know, that we'll be able to clarify ourselves and know how to act in the best way. But that requires, really purifying yourself from and exposing all of the shadows and the blind spots that you might have.
Yeah. I'm, needless to say, very young and thinking through a lot of these things. And I majored in religious studies in college for a while and kind of dropped out because podcast was doing really well. But whenever I've thought about these things, like it's so unbelievably complex, and I've gone back and forth with this discussion around universalism or perennialism versus differentiation of values and morals. And I wonder, like, I like what you're positing here, but like I wonder, do you think there are values and principles that would even transcend religious dogma? Like, say with Charlie Kirk, if someone, I'm not a fundamentalist Christian, you're not, but he was. And so what kind of values could we unify with some group of people on like that, that go beyond just scripture or religion or culture?
Well, here's the problem. The problem is that the moment you claim a dogmatic fixed value, then somebody will always be able to come up with an exception. All right, so let's say you posit, tell the truth. Tell the truth is the value. Be honest, tell the truth. Okay. Then you're watching Quentin Tarantino's movie Inglourious Bastards. And the Jew hunter is going through the house. And there's Jews in the basement. Now, are we hoping that the patron of the house tells the Nazi Jew hunter that the Jews are in the basement? Are we hoping that they tell the truth? Is that their moral imperative? Well, I got to tell the truth. He asked me the question.
Right.
No, fucking lie.
Yeah.
That's the good thing. So in any instance, there's an exception to that instance. And that's why every different situation is unique to the moment, which is why I think I was pointing originally to this anthro-ontology. Like, we know what the good thing is there. And yeah, we can talk about the principles of it. Okay, if someone's coming, immorally to kill someone based on the basis of genocide, and you need to lie, then we can explain it in general terms, but then there'll always be another exception in a gray area that we'll have to go from. So, while I believe there are values that we can explicate, everything is also subject to the living, breathing nuance of the moment and of the specifics, but there's heuristics and general kind of maxims and axioms that we can live by, and parables. I think that's why parables are so important, is because they point the way to truth without actually having to, give a law or a decree that is fixed in stone.
To the universal point, say something like love and compassion. Like, that's something I think we can all agree as being important. And I think Charlie Kirk embodied that to a degree, when talking to people on the far left and extending a sense of charity and understanding. Like, one time he was being questioned by a gay student who said he wants to be part of the conservative movement, and Charlie, said, I may disagree with that lifestyle, but we want to welcome you, and we want to unite against these shared ideas, and agree on things like immigration, taxes, gender affirming care, and we can still unify despite my disagreements with your lifestyle. And so that's coming from a sense of love and compassion,
Mhm.
I would say. So I wonder, like, is that a foundational example, something like love as being
Yeah, I mean,
universal versus others that might not be?
I think there's certain things that, there's certain guiding principles that are not like laws, but guiding principles. And I think we should, and I think there's an ought, and I think there is a should. I think we should default to love. I think we should exhaust all opportunities for reconciliation and unification and connection before resorting to anything that leads to division. Like there is an ought. So I'm not claiming like, yeah, it's different for everybody, whatever, anything's good. No, I believe there is an ought. There is a right and wrong. There is an ought, and there are principles that you can derive from that. I think that love and truth should be wedded, like that you shouldn't be speaking the truth without love, and you shouldn't be, loving without speaking the truth. That's coddling. So like there's certain things that I think guiding principles that we can go by. And, I think one of those is to try and marry together love and truth, so that everything that's true is loving and everything that's loving is true. And to understand that those are connected. So there's understandings that I think are helpful, and that also like understandings about judgment, like until you've actually taken the time to step in with compassion to who the person is, where they're coming from, like, and also any deep understanding of yourself, like judgment should be the last thing that you reach for, before, until you've gone through the process of compassion, gone through hearing their story and listening, and gone through understanding your own places and your own ways in which you've fallen from grace. Ye without sin be the one to cast the first stone, right? Like there's these reminders that exist in the sacred texts and in our bodies that I think are true. But I think they're best expressed in these parables and in these teachings. So
Hmm.
it's and I think there are, I agree with Rebbe Gaffney that there are, he elucidates 18 first principles and first values, but also
Hmm.
acknowledges that they're all in a field of value. And in this field of value, sometimes different values conflict against other values, but the unique specifics of the situation, you have to feel what is the right way forward.
Hmm. Hmm. I think love and compassion are pretty intuitive, easy ones, and that all religion, you can't even say all religions share, because there are, depending on what you mean by religion, there are sinister, dark, demonic religions. So you can't
Sure.
even really say all, but commonly acknowledged religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, etc. Love and compassion seem to be foundational to those faiths. Um, Other ones that might be a little bit less intuitive, but also at least clear to me, things like surrender and humility, surrendering to something bigger than yourself. That seems to be pretty universal. But I wonder things that aren't necessarily universal, and how you have a lot of conversations on your podcasts about different religions and faiths, and say that one particular difference that I've studied and take a lot of just interest in. I studied it and wrote about it closely in college. Of, say, in Hinduism, and Hinduism is not even one religion; it's hundreds of religions, but it's a
Hmm.
Western concept of diverse ideas in Indian spiritual philosophy. But there, in, say, Advaita Vedanta Hinduism, there's the idea that the individual self and the supreme self, Atman and Brahman, known as, are actually one, and they're not separate. I know you've talked about that before. But in Christianity, there's a fundamental separation between self and God. At least most 90% of what seems to be sort of dominant Christian ideas. I've talked to Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants about this. However, there were mystics like Meister Eckhart, who I'm sure you've heard of, that seemed to describe something a little bit more, at least experientially, in line with ideas from Advaita Vedanta about. I think he had a quote about the eye in which I see God is the same eye in which He sees me, and there's a lot. The foundation or the ground of my being is one with God. Things like that that pointed to something more unifying between individual self and supreme self or God. But the conventional, at least, and even when I went out to outside of mainstream Protestant Christianity, even in Orthodoxy, Catholicism, etc., more mystical forms of Christianity too that I've seen, and obviously there are tons of flavors and variations, and you can find something on any side that you'll agree with, but it appears that that is a big difference between certain Eastern and Western philosophies. So, how do you make sense of that division? And I'm not naive in that. At the end of the day, we all have to have an opinion or a view. We have to have an operational framework to go about our life and how we do things. So we have to come to some understanding, but something like that is sort of seemingly irreconcilable. And so, how do you make sense of like do you have the sense of maybe something that I default to sometimes, that I'm not a Christian fundamentalist, I'm not a Hindu fundamentalist, I'm not Muslim. I'm interested in self-transcendence. I'm interested in love and compassion. I'm interested in perennialism as Aldous Huxley presented it. And I think there are universal spiritual truths that we can unify on. If someone has asked me before, do you believe in God? I would say sort of cautiously, like, yes, but not in like a Christian way, not in a Hindu way. But like, I think there's something bigger than my own um, conscious understanding of the world, and there's something that I can surrender to that's bigger. Now, where do I get that from? Is that rationally supported by Christianity or Hinduism? I don't know, but I do default to a sense sometimes of, while I do strongly, you could say, hold to some kind of agnostic perennialism right now. Um, at the end of the day, like, what if there's some religion or faith that I've never heard of, or that you, Aubrey, Marcus, have never heard of, that's being practiced in Western Africa that we don't know about, that if we were to know about it, maybe we would really resonate with it? And so at the end of the day, do you have a sense of humility of like, I'm just trying to figure this out, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe my version of psychedelic perennial universalism tying East and West, maybe there's some holes in that too, and maybe there are other traditions that I don't know about that could also, maybe a different way of understanding God or divinity, maybe that could be resonant too. I just don't know about it, and I'm just trying to figure it out.
I mean, I think there's always there's a sacred place for humility for all of us. There's, God is often referred to as the mystery for a reason, capital M, mystery. There's certain aspects that we will never know, and we just have to bow before the mystery. And we will never be omniscient. That's reserved for God, itself, herself, himself, whatever pronoun you want to use. So we all have to bow before the mystery. That's true. But also, we can still at the same time have courage. And in the Kabbalist lineage, there's a word called tekufot, which is sacred humility and audacity. So if someone asks me, do I believe in God? I just kind of, like Carl Jung did, laugh and say, no, I don't believe in God. I know God. I know God. I know. And I
And what does that
know
mean?
what I know. Like
Right.
right. So, and as many of the mystic texts have claimed, the true name of God cannot be spoken. It's known. As soon
Right.
as you reduce it to words, you've missed it.
Yeah. And sorry to
No.
interject, but our mutual friend Jordan Peterson, or at least I know you've podcasted with him, I've podcasted, had dinners with him. He famously gets asked, do you believe in God? And he refuses to answer that question in a straightforward way. And people get very angry about the people, Christians and atheists are like, why is he doing this? Right. But similar to kind of what you're saying in a way, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I know God. And so I have the courage and audacity to say, I know. And I still bow before the mystery of, if you ask me to describe all the attributes of God, I'll do my best, but I'm not going to claim that anything I say beyond what I know is true. And that what I know is also still subject to evolution. my gnosis of God is evolving. I'm getting to know it more. If you have one avocado, you may think you know an avocado, but then you have guacamole, and then you have, avocado toast, and then you start to know, and then you put a little salt and a little lemon on it, and you start to know it even more. All right. Like, so, but the game is about gnosis. It's about what do you know? And then being willing to stand up for what you know. So I don't think it's just like, we can't know anything. Well, no, I think we can, but it's just when we go into the describing of it that we come into problems. And I think I've found people from every tradition, from, indigenous traditions to traditional religious traditions. Father Sean Allaire is a great example. He knows God. He knows Jesus. He knows Jesus. He knows God. And what he's speaking is true, and like, he's coming from that. And I've spoken to Sufi, masters. And when I read Rumi, like, I know that he knows God, and what he's speaking is true, and he's coming from a different lens. And Kashmir Shaivis, who know God and know Brahman and know all this and true. And I think there's something that happens when and this happens with curanderos, plant medicine practitioners. There's people who know the truth, and it just exudes out of them, and it's almost a wordless understanding. Now, when you get into the explanation, that's where things start to get a little dicey, and that's the problem with the fundamentalist reading of all these texts, right? Like, for every fundamentalist belief, there's a contradictory belief, right? So, I this is an example I'm posting on my Substack, coming up shortly. But so I post Ephesians 6:12, which is, again, our fight is not with the flesh and blood, but against those dark powers, those authorities, those evil forces in the heavenly realms. I'm kind of roughly paraphrasing that quote. I post that, and then someone posts this other Bible passage that says, thou shalt not commit adultery, basically. And then, or like, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery. And then they write, don't cherry pick. And I'm like, oh, okay. So what you're telling me is that every single word in this document, the Bible, is to be taken word for word. And then I pointed out the recommendations for stoning people to death, the recommendations for slavery, the recommendations for all these things. Like, it's ridiculous. It's just,
Right.
it's self-contradictory at those levels.
Yeah.
So these sacred texts, they're a wealth of riches of information, but you have to have, like, the eye and the mind and the heart to actually see them and understand them. So let's say you believe that Jesus was God incarnated on earth. All right. So that's your premise, which many Christians believe Jesus was God. God was Jesus, right? Like, I am the Father and the Father is me. Atman is Brahman. It's actually very similar. But then Jesus also said, that which I do, you shall do more and greater, when he was talking to other people. Well, what does that mean? That means that we all have the possibility to incarnate the divine. So that's contradictory to the fundamentalist reading, if you actually look at it. And I think you just need the patience and the thoughtfulness, and also the feeling of what you know to be true, to be able to interpret these texts and to be able to receive the wisdom and not fall for the superficial traps that lead to inevitable contradictions.
Yeah. And just to spend another couple minutes on this before we hit one other topic about mental health, before we go. I'm inclined to believe the kinds of things that you said, and like that makes sense to me. But I just wonder if there are other interpretations or other ways of understanding that. Like, is that not just its own kind of dogma to believe that we all, this idea that we all carry the essence of God, our true nature is God, or pure consciousness is God, the ego, the self, that is not God, but our true essence is. Whereas in Christianity,
you just added a lot of words. that, if you start adding a lot of words and you make that the doctrine, then you can become dogmatic about it. And that's why, again, I go back to Gnosis. It's like, what do you know and feel? What do you know and feel is true? And are you willing to know and feel more? Do you have the humility to say, like, I'm still evolving, learning, knowing more, but I know what I know, and if that changes, so be it. And I think that's the place of humility. I think we're in an evolving understanding constantly. So, but the moment you start to say, like, all is consciousness, the self is an illusion, okay, well, I can point to different arguments that, may call that into question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So as soon as you actually codify things, into words, then it becomes a problem. And that's why, great masters of many traditions, but it's especially spoken about in Taoism, like, the one who knows does not speak, right? Because, like, it's actually a frequency. It's an energetic, it's something that transcends words. And that thing is true. Like, that frequency is true. The frequency of love, the frequency of truth, like, there's a frequency that's true, but the moment you put it to words, the words are subject to all kinds of different interpretations. And depending upon what your proclivity is and your understanding is, you can interpret it a bunch of different ways. So I think we have to democratize our accessibility to the gnosis of God. We have to democratize the accessibility to our access to the divine. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about psychedelics. Now, psychedelics don't come without their own risks. And I'm not here to say that everybody should go run and do psychedelics, but they are a democratization of our access to gnosis. You do a 5-MeO-DMT ceremony, you're going to know something. And you're going to know something that you won't forget.
Right.
And, you can't describe it. It's like, it's ineffable. Like, if it all falls short when you put it into words, but, poets do their best to point at the truth, but we're never going to express the truth. The words always get in the way.
Yeah. Right. Like, even in, not to get too esoteric, but even in Hinduism, I looked at the rich debates between Ramanuja and Shankara. Shankara would believe in that individual self and God are one, and Ramanuja had more of a different view, that there's a unity between the two, but that there is still a separation too. Like, I think the difference between, like, a drop in the ocean versus, like, not to use a crude analogy, but like a slice of pizza and a pizza, like, that slice is still different. Whereas in there's different ways of explaining it, but even those, like, very seemingly granular but fundamental differences that have caused so much debate and tribalism and difference could even just be healthy debate, but it still is a duality of different ideas. So we're podcasters, we're thinkers, we're writers. So whenever you express an opinion about God or divinity, even just things that you said, which, again, I'm inclined to believe what you said. We read similar things and think similarly. We're both interested in psychedelics and different kinds of spiritual influences. But even with, as you pointed out, when I said the illusion of self or pure consciousness, our essence is God, our essence is transcendent, or things that you said as well about democratizing access to the divine. How do we know that that's not dogma either? Like, in other words, at the end of the day, is dogma just an inescapable reality of existing in the ideas of duality and space and time? And
no, I think dogma is equated to inflexibility, right? Like, so all value is evolving value. All parables are subject to reinterpretation. So the thing about perennialism is, I think it got a lot right, but what was missing is it's always an evolving perennialism. So values evolve, our understanding evolves. It can't be fixed and frozen in stone, because when you do that, then things don't apply. There was a lot of good advice in the Bible for, 300 AD. There was some good advice when they put that in there, but that doesn't apply now. We have different ideas about morality and justice, and we have different ideas about a lot of things. So that needs to evolve. We need to allow things to evolve. So dogma is the inflexibility of thought.
Are you saying
Right?
there's nothing that should be inflexible? Like, say we talked about love and compassion or surrender, humility. Should those be rigid?
There's guiding principles that are so close that it would take a wild thought experiment to find a contrary example where you wouldn't apply the essence of that. So, like there's nothing that I think exists that can explain, wanton cruelty, right? Like it was necessary to wantonly torture this being, right? Like
Right.
there's nothing that's like justifies that, right? So there is a fundamental morality that is real and true, but the dogma says that, the dogma is when you say something that is not subject to the specifics of the situation. I think there are right and wrong answers depending on the specifics of the situation, but it always requires the participation of the specifics. So the Torah is an evolving Torah. The dogma is an evolving dogma. The morality is an evolving morality. Value is an evolving value. Perennialism is evolving perennialism. That's what makes it non-dogmatic. Because when you have rules that apply, and dogma exists not just in the religions or in politics or in other things, it exists in the plant medicine traditions. There's dogma that comes from, I have the deep admiration and respect from the Lakota elders and my brothers and sisters on the Red Road Path, on the Beauty Way. There's dogma in there. If a woman's on her moon, she can't sit in the lodge. All right. I respect your beliefs. And if you're holding lodge and that's your rules, then that's that. I don't necessarily, personally think that makes a lot of sense. I would prefer if that was not dogmatic, but it was actually subject to, okay, what's the current situation? What's going on? Like, let's look at this with fresh eyes. But I think dogma is when there's absolute and utter inflexibility, and there's a law that applies to all situations at all times, no matter what. And, I think that's where we run into trouble. But there's guiding principles like love and compassion and loving everyone and telling the truth that are like guiding principles that are almost always going to be right. And those are the things that we should use to guide ourselves, but also be not dogmatic about it, but be open to, curiously exploring if that applies. But in many instances, there's going to be cases where that always applies. Like I said, I believe that in every situation, love and truth should be wedded, so that you should speak your truth lovingly and, express your love truthfully, right? Like that's a maxim, that's a parable, that's a heuristic, a way to like think about things that's almost always true. But if I thought hard enough, I might be able to find a specific situation where actually maybe you needed to evolve that slightly or act a little differently depending on the situation.
Right. Are there scenarios where love is not the right response, or at least the degree of it maybe is less? Maybe you can always
Or
have,
that it's love at a higher dimensional level, and it's not love as it's expressed here, but it's the love for the evolution of the soul. So that's what I mean by not being dogmatic. Is like you have to understand that life is paradox, that life is unique, and it's subject to the living, breathing moment of where we are, who we are, and what's going on. That doesn't mean that there aren't guiding principles. It doesn't mean that there aren't values and principles of the cosmos, but it just means that everything is subject to interpretation in the present and specific moments and circumstances.
Right. So you're saying, to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, like there's a spectrum of ideas ranging from inflexible dogmatism that needs revision all the way to a more open-ended understanding, but not moral relativism either.
Right.
Not because that's sometimes a trap that the far left can fall into.
Sure.
Right. So you would oppose that too, but that there's some happy medium that we can strike
Right.
And even, but to my earlier question again, like, still, is there, do you still carry a sense of like, hey, I might be wrong about like totally like all of these things, potentially, or that there might be some spiritual tradition that you and I have never heard of, that if we were to practice it, we'd be like, oh my God, I've been living my life doing psychedelics or Buddhism or Christianity or whatever, and oh my God, this thing is like, this makes way more sense than that thing, right? So do you carry a bit of that of like, maybe I'm wrong about this, and maybe it's not about these XYZ spiritual practices or beliefs that I have, and that there's something else maybe?
Yeah, as I said, there's always a place for humility. Humility always has a seat at the table. But it's there's also things that I know, and I'm not going to back down from those things that I know. And I'm not going to try to describe the things that I know, but I know them. Now, is there a hypothetical thought experiment where I come to know I evolve my gnosis? Yes, everything I know is an evolving gnosis, but I know it. I know it as well as I can know it now, and it'll evolve. But there's nothing that could happen that would convince me that God doesn't exist as the God that I know. I know that to be true. So it's not like I'm gonna like read something somewhere and be like, you know what, maybe God isn't real. No, I know God. I know that's real. And I know love is real. I know what it feels like. I know I know the truth of that.
But what about,
And
say, changing your picture of God or changing your picture of love
of
potentially?
course, as I said, everything is subject to evolution, but there's certain ways in which you know enough that the
Mm.
percentage of evolution is going to be similar. Like, for example, like I'm a basketball player, right? And I know, I'm a good 3-point shot. Now, I know that if all of a sudden someone comes up with a way that you actually throw the ball without looking over your head backwards, and that's the better way to shoot the ball, like, no, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Or that, you never use topspin when you're playing tennis or pickleball. Topspin is out. Okay,
Mm.
like that's never going to happen. Like it's always going to have a place. And there's
Mm.
room for a slice. There's room for a finger roll. There's room to, change the way that you do something. But there's certain things that may evolve a little bit. Like you might say, actually, it's a little better if you bring your arm in alignment, more, and you shoot
Mm.
off, with more pressure on your front finger rather than your middle finger. You
Mm.
like so there's subtle evolutions that could occur to how to shoot a
Mm.
ball but there's certain things that are only going to change slightly.
Mm.
So everything is subject to evolution, but there's certain things that are damn fucking close. And I
Right.
think we live in the damn fucking close world.
Yeah.
And that's when we make a stand for value, for the good, the true, the beautiful. We're standing for something that's damn fucking close to the good, the
Right.
true, and the beautiful. And we're never going to get perfect. Everything is, and that's why it's not dogma. It's always subject to
Right.
questioning and analysis. And if someone says, like, look, man, the best way to shoot the ball is to throw it over your head, two hands,
Yeah.
I'll hear you out. Let's go hoop. And if
Yeah.
you prove me wrong and like this is the way, like prove it. Like I'm open to it. I'm not going to tell you
Yeah.
no. Like let's ball. And if that's the way, then that's the way. But like
Right.
I'm fucking confident that this some version of this is the way to do it.
Yeah. I'm certainly less spiritually evolved than you. So when you said, I know God, I'm just not there yet. And I know lots of people would listen to that and quibble or strongly challenge or question what you said. But say, like, to your earlier point about was it anthro-ontological?
Yeah,
Yeah, about love being like, that's something that I can feel, right? And so
for sure.
I don't think we'll ever evolve or outgrow from love as being an important, powerful, paramount human emotion. So that seems inflexible. That seems like something.
Exactly. And that's what the moral relativist or the postmodernist or Yuval Harari, they'll say something like love is just a contrivance. It's a
Oh, really?
story. It's not real. Right.
They would do
Yeah.
that?
No, for real.
Really?
literally what they say. It's a
Wow.
contrivance. It's a story. There is no value. Love is just a story that we tell. It's just neurons that fire in this particular way. It's not real. Nah, motherfucker, love is real.
Yeah.
Like, I know love is real. Now, when we go to explain love, how do you explain love? Well, then you start to run into problems.
Gotcha. We're almost out of time. If you want to answer this quickly, you can. If you want to answer this long form, it's totally up to you. But just about mental health and healing, and we can't open this rabbit hole fully now, but just with the individual that shot Charlie Kirk, and other individuals who are prone to political extremism, ideological extremism, and how that coincides with mental health. And d- just the question for you is, do you feel like things like psychedelics in particular, but also just the growing popularity of I know everyone's in therapy these days, but more rigorous forms of psychotherapy, meditation, breath work, that some of these things can help us advance as a species and overcome this mental health crisis that I'm sure contributes and coincides with this radical political extremism and leads to assassination attempts for Trump, Charlie Kirk, et cetera, et cetera.
The one thing that I can unequivocally recommend is breath work. I can't recommend that anybody do psychedelics, but we all need to practice some form of pranayama, the conscious utilization of our breath. Our breath is life. Neshama is the word in Hebrew, and it means spirit, but it also means breath. Espiritus, respiration, spirit and breath. It's all connected. So all of us, if we want to, learn how to connect to the spiritual truth, like breathing is something that I can recommend to everybody. And, whatever form that takes, whether it's Wim Hof style or whether it's yogic style or whether it's just box breathing or, conscious breathing practices, that's something that I think will go a really long way. And then breath, and then also community, like surrounding yourself with a group of loving individuals who pour love into you, care for, that you care about and that you love. And even if you just have a pet, like a dog that loves you and you feel love, whatever it is, like find your way to love and community and breath.
Yeah. And I'll say this very quickly. Sometimes those things can be hard to do, and that's where some of the deeper work, in my life a few years ago, after graduating high school, feeling like love was far away and really hard to get, and any conventional means of going out or socializing was still pulling me away from that. And so that's when I started listening to you more and more, and then trying things like MDMA therapy, psychotherapy, meditation, breath work, like doing different things of methods of introspection to see what's pulling me away from those things. And so those things
Mhm.
can be useful too. And there are dozens of podcasts I'd recommend on your platform that have gone deep into that. But that's another conversation for another day. But thanks so much for being here. I really enjoyed
I enjoyed the conversation for
this
sure.
conversation. Is there anything you want to tell people? I know you have a Substack now. Anything else you want to point people to?
Yeah, I mean, I got a new book coming out in 2026, You versus Anti-You. Keep a lookout for that. My poetry book is available for sale now. It's really, a pure expression of my heart and my art. It's called Love to the Seventh Power, audiobook on Amazon, and you can get that. But otherwise, just, love each other, and, we'll make it through this. We're going to make it through this thing together.
Yeah, and we'll definitely share this on Substack, and there's a really great community there. A lot of people will see this on Substack, and so they'll see your Substack pop up here as well. But again, I said earlier to you, welcome to the community, and it's a great platform for sharing ideas. And also, you're running is it Correct Life and another company as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Correct Life Supplements. Really high performance supplements that for everyday people who just want to optimize the way that they feel and the way that they think and uh, unlock the body's best performance. So it's something I've been passionate about for a long time. We had a great run with On It. We got the team back together, and there's more work to do. So that's Correct with a K. We also have a Sound Money project using an alternative to currency, these gold bills called ARMs. That company's called Metalmark. So I'm up to some cool shit, doing some fun things. But yeah, just in doing my best to enjoy my life for the short time that I have it.
Awesome, man. Keep up the great work on the podcast. And again, a lot of great conversations over the years I've heard on your platform, digging into just what I'm pursuing on my Substack, The Meta Mystic, about just human transformation and just how to evolve and just be a better person. I've enjoyed a lot of conversations that you've done on that. So
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for all the inspiration.
For sure. Take
all
care,
right.
Rob.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for watching the episode, everyone. We greatly appreciate it. I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this episode, David Roth. I met David at the Psychedelic Science Conference earlier this year, a couple months ago, and David and I really got along because of our shared interests and concerns about young men's mental health and plant medicine, psychedelic therapy, meditation, consciousness, and more. Anyone who's been following the show, especially the last couple of months, knows that I'm very interested in those topics and will be doing a lot of episodes specifically devoted to them with a number of high-profile guests in those areas, such as Locke Kelly, Yoni Asher, Brett Weinstein, and I will be doing a podcast on Gen Z dating and relationships. But I will be doing a lot of episodes on meditation and future of psychedelic therapy, where the field is at right now. Many individuals such as Matt Johnson and Robin Carhart Harris have appeared on the show already and will be featured in future episodes. So we would greatly like to take the time here to thank David Roth for his support for our shared missions for improving the mental health of our society, and particularly the unique challenges that young people, my generation, Gen Z, face. And like I said, expect a lot more podcasts illuminating and shedding light on those very critical topics.